Hey everybody, Babooni here. And today I have the special privilege of getting to interview Kurt, who's the brainchild of the Paragon format. And because we're both in California, I can actually be with him in person for this interview. So we're going to be sharing a mic here. Say hello to everybody.
Hey everybody, Kurt here.
Yeah. And so, we're going to be talking about the Paragon format. I have a couple questions I'm going to ask Kurt. And let's get on with it. So Kurt, what inspired you to create the Paragon format?
Yeah, well, there were like two main things I would say that inspired it. I saw two problems. Well, problem may be a strong word, but there were two things about the State of Redemption that I thought could use some help. And one was that I didn't see that there was a good multiplayer format. There's teams, which is great for people who like teams, but that's definitely a small subset of the redemption population. There was certainly no like casual multiplayer option. It's nothing that would be anything like that would pair to something like Commander for Magic the Gathering. And then the other issue that I saw was that there wasn't a great format for brand new players. Something that would be more casual, something that like a group could just get together and play together without feeling like you had to have all of the best cards to compete, or without being tossed into a competitive tournament or something like that. And so I just took inspiration from some of the multiplayer formats of other popular card games, took some aspects of those and put a redemption twist on it, and tried to kind of kill two birds with one stone, make something that would be a nice casual multiplayer format that would kind of scratch the multiplayer itch for veterans and also be something that's approachable for new players.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So talking about the newer player perspective, like let's look at the existing redemption formats. You have like booster draft, you have sealed deck. Those are generally better for newer players than constructed. But if you're a newer player, you're going to have to, every time you sign up for one of these events, you're going to be having to pay a lot of money in a sense to like keep opening product. And so the Paragon, like it allows you to build your own deck, and like you can choose your Paragon and then build your whole deck around that. Now you have a deck you can take around, and it's not as, like you said, as intimidating to bring to like an event as a type 2 deck where you have to think about 100 cards, or a type 1 deck where you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to beat Matthew or whatever. So I feel like this format kind of fills like a nice niche that maybe Redemption hasn't experienced or had. So let's see. I have a question here that talks about how might Paragon appeal to newer players. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot about Paragon that I think is good for new players. I mean, the big obvious thing is that it's intended off the bat to be more casual, because it's, you have three or more players getting together, and, there's table talk, and these aren't like optimized decks with all the, most expensive or complicated cards. But even beyond that, there's lots of things that are good for new players. For one, it's an extremely cheap format because it only uses the, most recent and readily available cards. A lot of decks are made with a lot of starter deck cards, roots cards, and e-commons from, the last several sets. So you're not having to shell out a bunch of money to get Second Coming and Three Woes and all the best rares and ultra rares from older sets. And yeah, it's, the deck sizes are small and inexpensive, and especially the reason, I think more than anything else, that the reason that it's good for new players is that it's, even though there are some like new mechanics to accommodate multiplayer, it's way simpler just because of the card pool that's legal. There are so many mechanics that they don't have to have even learned yet. You can have players who have never seen a sight before, or a star ability, or any other number of, retired or temporarily put on pause, mechanics. So many things like that they don't even have to know that they exist, and they can still build any legal Paragon deck they want. So yeah, for all those reasons, I think it's really great for new players.
Yeah, so I have here pulled up the list of Paragon cards that are legal, and I'm seeing down here there's 783 cards. Let's compare that to maybe the pool of like something like rotation. So that's like 2,459. So if anyone wants to do the math, but yeah, as you can see, it's like a significant simplification of the card pool. And I'm pulling up all the dominants here. Like you don't need to be able to afford a second coming. Like here are the dominants, like half of them come out of starter decks and the others people are just passing around the booster draft tables as draft chaff. So like seems really accessible from a new player's perspective and maybe like less intimidating. You don't have to worry about all these sets and sets and sets worth of cards. You can just focus on the latest cards and then maybe you even have like a good booster draft. You're like, hey, I made a really good purple deck. Hey, what's like a purple Paragon I could build a deck around? And you've kind of designed these Paragons with that in mind, like to be kind of relevant with what's currently legal, and maybe there's going to be new cards that are printed that maybe you're going to be able to make new Paragons for. So all this to say, I agree that yeah, this seems like a really cool way to introduce your friends to Redemption. You can build your own Paragon decks and then lend them out to other people, and then they can try and like, oh, I really like Abishai, I really like Phineas, like maybe that could be like a good onboarding experience for them for Redemption. So yeah, let me get back to my questions here. And so let's talk more about the problems you saw in modern day Redemption multiplayer. Like recently you've been coming back into the game and you've also got, so that experience has let you kind of look at the game with maybe fresh eyes and maybe an outsider's eyes that not everyone in the community is maybe like aware of certain things that are, or they just been swimming in it for so long it just feels normal. So like what are some of the things that really stuck out to you about modern multiplayer Redemption that kind of maybe rubbed you the wrong way or something?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that really the problems with Redemption multiplayer aren't even modern ones. They've kind of been around from the beginning, though some of them did get worse over time as the card pool like expanded and things got more complicated. Because, I mean, the first big problem with multiplayer in Redemption is that the whole duality of your decks, where you have both your good cards and your evil cards, and it's good versus evil on each turn, that really breaks down when you have more than two players, because suddenly you don't have just one opponent that you're trying to block. You know, you have several opponents who are trying to block, and things get uneven. And the way that it works, you know, with traditional Redemption multiplayer is that you're really incentivized to have little to no defense. There are, you know, anybody who's played a lot of games of that can list off a bunch of reasons, but you know, some of the basic ones are that you want to always be able to rescue on your turns. You need plenty of offense, but you don't want to spend too much of your deck space on defense because you might not even ever get to block if other people just choose to attack other players. And if you have too much of a defense, you just become the intimidating player that no one wants to attack. So instead they attack everyone else and they run, you know, they rescue all the lost souls. And then on your turn, there's nothing left for you to rescue. It's, you know, just some of the basic core gameplay loops just don't function the way they're supposed to when there are more than two players. But you could say that Teams solves that problem, and it does, right? Teams makes it one team versus another team and completely solves that issue. But it doesn't solve all the other issues, because there's the issue of, you know, just board states growing to be terribly complex, with everyone has their own lost souls and fortresses and artifacts and territory class characters and all these sorts of things, where you have, you know, you can easily get dozens of abilities ongoing that you're supposed to keep track of. That's just, you know, makes the game overwhelming and unfun, you know, once it reaches a certain threshold. Again, that's something that's terrible for new players. I mean, good luck trying to, you know, if you don't even know what half the cards do yet. I mean, that's just a complete non-starter for newbies. You know, and yeah, there's also the issue of king making, where because it's multiplayer, you can kind of make decisions that favor one opponent over another. So wins can feel kind of unearned. I mean, you can gang up in ways that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, you know, can, you know, really be brutal. So yeah, and again, Teams solves some of these problems, but Teams is very restrictive because it requires exactly 4 players. You know, you can't play with 3 or with 5, for example. And your decks have to be built so that they're legal with your partner's deck, meaning that you have to arrange ahead of time that you don't have any of the same lost souls or the same dominance. And just the power ceiling of optimized Teams decks that are meant to work together is through the roof. And, you know, good luck just coming with a couple decks you you just kind of put together haphazardly, you've got no chance. And games can time out before people even get a second or third turn. I mean, I don't get me wrong, it may sound like I'm totally harping against teams. I'm glad teams exist, and I'm happy for the people who enjoy it, but you could probably tell I'm not one of the players who enjoys teams. So yeah, it's just for all those reasons, Redemption needs a multiplayer format that can solve as many of those problems as possible, or the ones that it can't solve completely, at least mitigate them. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got to play a couple of games of teams in the couple years since I've been starting to replay Redemption. And it's a bittersweet memory because, like, on one hand, I think I share a lot of the sentiments you have about your kind of problems with teams, but on the other hand, it was sweet when I sat down with my brother in a Northwest regional, and we both brought an Ashkelon deck to the tournament, and both of our decks really abused to put down Ashkelon on turn one and make it so opponents would have to discard 4 cards from their hand every turn. And that actually, we pulled it off a couple of times in teams. So it's like, where else are you going to get the opportunity to do something like that? So it is interesting, but it is nuanced. But I can also see how it's very overwhelming for new players. And yeah, so when you say you've identified these current problems of like king making, board state, the unbalance towards a skew away from defense towards offenses, what are specifically some things about Paragon that addresses each of these pain points?
Sure. Yeah. Let's see. Well, the problem with defense, there's several things in Paragon that are meant to solve that problem. And they're pretty much all related to the fact that you don't the way that like attacking and blocking and lost souls works very differently in Paragon. Because in the Paragon format, you don't actually include any lost souls in your deck. Instead, there's a shared lost soul deck that that everybody shares that has all the lost souls in it. And just basically at the start of every turn, there will be a certain number of lost souls available, which for one thing means that there's no soul drought, which is itself already part of the defense problem solved right there. But more significantly, the way that attacking and defending works is that when you attack, you don't actually get to pick which player you're attacking. Instead, it actually works sort of like how teams does, where either of your opponents can end up attacking, and you just go clockwise, and whoever first decides to block blocks. And that means that there's no just attacking the weakest link, right? It means that pretty much every round you're going to have at least one opportunity to block if you want to, because if the player on your right blocks, then you've got first. I mean, if they attack, if the player on your right attacks, then you have first dibs to block if you want to. So your defense is not going to go to waste. You're going to have opportunities to block, and people aren't just going to attack the weakest link. And you don't need to worry about people attacking other players and rescuing all the lost souls, so there are none available. And on top of that, the Paragons enforce some card quantities so that you're required to have a certain number of evil cards in your deck, so people aren't going to go without a defense, right? It's sort of like type. It's not exactly like type 2 because it's not an equal split between good and evil, but it's similar in that it mandates that you actually have some defense. No, it's not going to be like old time type 1 multiplayer when a lot of the best players would show up with little to no defense. So anyways, that's the defense problem. In terms of king making, it's some of those same mechanics actually are solve that problem too, because there's no more just giving free souls away to people. That used to be a problem with multiplayer, is you'd want to save your defense for some other players, or just let the lost soul be rescued so there'd be nothing left for them, right? Basically, if someone can't block, then the next player just blocks, right? So there's not freebies like that, not like shenanigans with Soul Drought. And also, there's no like using Son of God or New Jerusalem to block, because, before, if one of your opponents is attacking another of your opponents, you could jump in with your Son of God and New Jerusalem to try to rescue the lost soul out so that there's nothing left for them. That's not a thing in Paragon. So, there are some other things, but yeah, you get the idea. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. The issue of just the board states and the complex cards and all that. That has to do with the deck building rules. Solves that problem. For one, the fact that it's not the entire rotation card pool that's allowed. It's just the more recent sets and more of the starter decks as well. And that means a lot of the complex mechanics, or are not part of it, or just in general fewer mechanics, even though, maybe they're not the most complex ones that are removed. I mean, the Game of Redemption was very much streamlined, I think, in a very good way, following Gospel of Christ, and then this format kind of follows that. Paragon is sort of, in many ways, the game that the elders have been trying to make it for the past few years, if that makes sense. And then on top of that, the deck building restrictions in terms of, your deck size is exactly 40 cards. And you have to have certain quantities of certain card types. It just prevents people from, among other things, it prevents players from making crazy combos. You're not going to show up with people with 100 card decks, or crazy board states of 5 fortresses with 2 extra artifacts activated on them and a bunch of territory class characters. It's a very natural way to put a limit on all of those things. So.
Yeah, in addition, the removal of Lost Soul cards from everybody's deck and putting those Lost Souls in the shared Lost Soul deck, a lot of the Lost Souls running around right now are Lost Souls that have static effects. And one of my favorite things to do in Type 1 is build a 100-card deck and play Harvest Time and put them all on the play on turn 1. And so I'm definitely guilty of muddying up the board state as soon as I can. But yeah, like Paragon doesn't have that problem as far as the Lost Souls are concerned. So in a weird way, getting rid of the Lost Soul deck kind of simplifies things for people. Yeah, so let's keep moving on here. So here's a question I have. Why not use the same set of legal cards as rotation? Why create a new format altogether?
Yeah, there were a few reasons for this. Some of them I've kind of already touched on. The idea that it's way simpler for, both for new players and also just to keep the board state in general be much more manageable, even for veterans who just don't want to keep track of, 20 of the more complicated older cards at once. But there are other reasons too. I really liked the way that the game has been designed the last few years. And I just, if I'm making a new format, especially one that's supposed to appeal to new players, I just kind of wanted to honor that vision in some ways. There's also the factor that I was one guy trying to design a lot of these Paragon cards, and, balancing them, designing them was way easier when I had a more limited card pool to work with. And yeah, so that was another reason. And that's not to say that I would never consider gradually phasing in more sets. I've certainly considered that. But there are a few reasons why I haven't done so yet. Number one, I think that, every year as another set is released, the card pool is going to feel significantly less limited. I mean, especially this coming year where we're getting a new set and Roots 2. I mean, it's one of the reasons I've been so excited about Roots 2 is that it's going to just add a bunch of new options for every brigade, which I think is great. I think that after the next set in Roots 2 comes out, like, people are not going to feel like the card pool is very limited. It'll only be like the grizzled veterans who want to play the specific old card that they have in mind that they'll miss. And like I said, maybe it will gradually phase in some of the other cards. But some of the reasons that I haven't is, like I said, keeping things simpler and more streamlined, very focused, keeping things cheap, like more affordable, I mean. But then there's also just a lot of the older cards just don't work super well with multiplayer in general. Like, I mean, for example, sites are just, if sites were going to be part of the game, I would just say that, you can't put Lost Souls on them. They would just sort of be treated like fortresses because they don't really work with a shared land of bondage. But there's also cards that are just completely broken and would, like, if I were to add more sets, there would have to be an extensive ban list. And case in point is Kingdoms of the World from Gospel of Christ. This fortress would go in every deck, and it would make every game just unbearably terrible. Because what it says is that if an opponent plays a dominant, you may underdeck a hero. Well, the problem with this is it doesn't care whose hero you're underdecking and which opponent played the dominant. one of your opponents, if one of your opponents is attacking with a hero, then a different one of your opponents plays whatever dominant they want. You can then underdeck their hero right out of battle, and there's, there's very little they can do about it. And that's exactly the sort of king making stuff that we're trying to avoid. Yeah, king making, that's kind of almost a pun with kingdoms. Yeah, that's exactly the sort of king making we want to avoid. And if you haven't caught on already, like, this would absolutely go in every Paragon deck if it were legal. And if every player had Kingdoms of this World out, then anytime anyone plays a dominant, then however many opponents that player has, that many heroes are all being underdecked at once. So you can imagine, any card that's like that, it breaks the game. That's an extreme example. There are, less extreme examples, but yeah, again, it's just way easier to start with a more focused, streamlined card pool. And I think you'll also find that people who, those of you who really enjoy deck building, it's kind of a neat, different deck building challenge, not only to follow these, Paragon restrictions of certain brigades and certain quantities, but also just to work with different sets than you're used to. It makes it very fresh and makes the format feel, like its own unique thing.
Yeah, I know I fall into this as a deck builder where I find cards that I'm really comfortable with using. So like I'll build a deck and then I'll try some out new offense and I'll just throw Herods as the defense. But as Paragon, now I'm entering as a new eyes. And like, I don't have access to my Herods anymore. What am I going to do? So it forces me to, like, restrictions breed creativity. So it forces me to get creative. But I'm not overwhelmed because, like, if I pick Moses as my Paragon, at least I know I'm going to be starting in brown. So that's like a good place to start. So let's go into my next question. So let's look at this Moses card. Based upon the countdown here, we have 12 white cards and 12 other non-white cards. And compared that to, you also have to have 10 brown cards and 10 non-brown cards. So if we do the math, you have 24 good cards and then 20 evil cards. And this is pretty consistent across all the Paragons. So why did you decide to make it so that it's not 50-50? Why does, like, in each Paragon, is it slightly more good than evil?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is that I actually initially did have everything split equal good and evil, sort of like type 2. But then just in testing, it found that even though the games were moving a lot faster than traditional multiplayer, which I guess is actually another issue that I didn't mention earlier, is that how slow the games can be, waiting between turns. Paragon was moving a lot faster, but it still felt like the game would be more enjoyable if the offenses were just given a little bit more of a boost relative to the defenses. Just people could rescue, the percentage of successful rescue attempts could increase slightly if the scales were tipped just slightly in that direction. So that was just a simple issue of testing found the game could go a little bit faster. So it was as simple as that.
I have another design question here. Why did you decide to design each Paragon deck to essentially force multi-brigade offenses and defenses? Because, for example, Moses, you can only play 12 white cards. The other 12 good cards in your deck, they have to be non-white. So you're basically locked into trying to play white plus something else. So why did you decide to do it that way?
Sure, yeah. Well, one of the reasons was to, again, make the format kind of fresh and different, because it's kind of a fun deck building challenge to be forced into using some off brigade cards that you wouldn't normally. In building a lot of these decks, I've discovered some small combos that I would never put like in a regular competitive type 1 deck, but are nevertheless cool to pull off, in a Paragon format. Another reason was it was a way to balance a lot of these themes, because, as anyone who plays Redemption competitively knows, that, at any given time, there are certain themes that are competitively viable and others that are less so. And by forcing people to go multi-brigade, it significantly lowers the power ceiling, which then allows other themes to, compete in that sense. And it also allowed for some of the most fun Paragon abilities, like, for example, Benaiah is one of my favorite Paragons because he just allows you to use, he allows your human warriors to use weapons regardless of brigade. And there are some other Paragons like that. Like, for example, one of Deborah's abilities is that your judges' characters can use judges' enhancements regardless of brigade. And when players are forced to use multiple brigades, abilities like that really feel like a reward, right? Because it's like you're the player who doesn't actually have to think, worry too much about the brigades because you're getting to mix this stuff together and play it regardless of brigade. And also, this question that you asked is one that I have gotten a lot, but I think that the more you start to build decks yourself, you'll find that it's kind of overstated how much you're forced into multi-brigade, because remember, you're for example, with Deborah, your non-gold good cards, that includes things like all of your good dominants and your good fortresses. So, your Son of God, your New Jerusalem, your Angel of the Lord, whatever other good dominants you want to put in there. And like your Judge's Seat and, whatever, maybe Storehouse or whatever, like all of those go in your non-gold section. So it gets to the point where there aren't that many cards that aren't gold that you still need to put in. And some of those are ones that you'd be putting in anyway, like your Angel Under the Yoke, for example, would go in any deck that has judges anyway. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, and also the exact quantities vary Paragon to Paragon. And it tends to be that, like, for example, ones like Deborah, who, her ability is related to getting to use things off brigade, she will tend to have a higher quantity of off brigade cards, right? Some non-gold and non-gray in her case. Whereas someone who is very focused on, this Paragon is really built around the primary brigades and only the primary brigades, they probably have a higher count of primary and a lower count of off brigade, if that makes sense. So, yeah, that's my answer.
Here's a fun question. How did you come up with the name Paragon for the format?
Yeah, that took some brainstorming. I didn't know what to call them at first. My starting name was Leader, but I wasn't really satisfied with that because not all of the characters who ended up being Paragons were necessarily leaders. Think of people like Ruth. She was a grandmother to kings, but she herself was just a humble refugee woman, certainly not some great leader of Israel. And another reason why I had initially considered something like Leader was, when I was just initially starting this, I was thinking there would be good ones and evil ones, and you'd have like a good leader to lead your offense and an evil leader to lead your defense. That ended up proving to be way too complicated and unnecessarily difficult to balance and all that. And it was betraying one of the initial goals, which was to make this like fun and easy and approachable. So once I settled on, okay, no, there are just going to be good ones, and I don't really like the name Leader, and certainly not going to call them Commanders. So what do I want to call them? And I eventually came up with the idea of calling them Paragons, which, if you don't know what Paragon means, it's like a shining, perfect example of some positive quality. So rather than representing like the leader of your forces, your Paragon is instead some virtuous person who's inspiring all of your characters. So each one of them is the Paragon of something. So like, I believe Ruth would be the Paragon of loyalty, or Joseph is the Paragon of forgiveness. Esther's the Paragon of courage, Abraham, Paragon of faith, and so on. So not, once I thought of that name, I pretty much instantly knew, oh yeah, I'm sticking with that one. Everything else I brainstormed was like, no, this is the name. And it also, making everybody Paragon of something specific was also great fodder for when I was trying to think up thematic abilities, because it was like, okay, what's an ability that, kind of seems courage related or faith related or, forgiveness related, it was helpful there too.
Yeah, great answer. Do you have any future Paragon plans that you're willing to talk about right now? Like, will we ever see evil Paragons come out?
Sure. I don't think we'll ever see evil Paragons. I mean, well, for one thing, if there were ever evil ones, I'd probably want to change the name, as I don't think Paragon would really fit anymore. And, I do prefer, to whatever extent a player is sort of taking on the persona of their their Paragon, it's nice to be some good thing. But yeah, I do have some plans that I could talk about just in general terms. I'm certainly planning, when the new set and Roots 2 eventually release, definitely planning on revising these Paragons, both updating some of them, for balancing purposes after feedback, or just based on the new card pool and how some of them might change, but also adding new ones. Certainly adding some new ones. I mean, you may notice that I only included characters who have a hero available in the Paragon format. So there's some big names who aren't yet legal in Paragon, like especially with the New Testament, because this does not include Gospel of Christ, and that's the last time we saw many of the New Testament characters. So there's only a handful. It's just some of the characters who were in INJ or who were in Roots, which is why we have like Peter, John, Claudia, and one other I'm forgetting right now. So yeah, certainly there are lots of new characters we can add as new sets are released, and there are also some of them that are going to need to be nerfed as more sets are added to the pool, because especially some of these New Testament ones, they have abilities that would be way too good with a greater New Testament card pool, but I've intentionally made strong, because if you're using New Testament characters, I mean, you're using like INJ stuff and root stuff, so So anyway, you can look forward to a fresh set of Paragons, some revised, some replaced, some brand new, and if you have feedback about any of the current Paragons, like please, send it my way. Or if there's something that you'd really look forward to, I mean, it's like some character you really want to be a Paragon, I'm open to that too. Or, obviously I'm not going to start working on the next set of Paragons until I see the new cards. So, if the new set comes out, you have ideas for, this new theme, I really want the Paragon to be this, and I have this great idea, like send that my way. I'd love for this to gradually become more of a community effort and not just a Kurt effort. Yeah, because the more others get into it, I think the better it will be. So.
Yeah. What is or who is your favorite Paragon so far that you've designed, maybe from a design perspective, and then maybe what's the one you really enjoy playing with?
Yeah, I think my number one answer to both would be a name that I've already mentioned, is Benaiah. He was one that, like, once I thought of the ability, I knew I was going to keep this ability, because it's both really fun to build and play, and also very thematic. It kind of takes the idea of him snatching a spear and runs with it, because you get to use weapons off brigade, which is just very fun. There's nothing else in Redemption that lets you do it like that. And it also has the part where, if you defeat an opponent's warrior, you can take any weapon that was attached to that warrior, which then, of course, is easy for you to play because you can use them off brigade. So yeah, it's thematic, it's fun to deck build, it's a ton of fun to play, and in fact was in testing so strong that I had to actually nerf him by actually increasing, and this is a good example of why some of the numbers, like the strict numbers for brigades, are necessary. I actually had to increase the requirements for the primary brigade, especially on the defense, because Benaiah's defense was just way too strong when you were allowed to have too many non-Pilgrim cards, because there are just so many great evil warriors and evil weapons, even just in the Paragon card pool, that it needed to be toned down. He was that strong. Yeah. Some other cool ones. I like David. I don't think he's necessarily the strongest Paragon, but he's just kind of a fun an incentive to just have a deck full of all your first Samuel stuff and second Samuel stuff. One that but there are, yeah, but then there's others. I almost don't even want to get into all of them, because I kind of want people to discover them on their own. There are some Paragons in there that may look kind of tame on the surface until you realize certain cards are in the Paragon card pool and can do some wild things. Oh, yeah, and you just pulled up Hannah, and I forgot to mention her earlier. She is a really fun one as well, because her ability turns, like, a couple starter deck characters and Spy from Roots into, like, 3 of the best heroes in the game. Because, you just look at Hannah and her equivalent in the other starter deck, which is Ithamar, the clay hero. And, normally they wouldn't go in many competitive decks, because it's just look at your opponent's hand and you may withdraw. That's all they do. No modifiers, nothing. But with Hannah's Paragon ability, they become superstars because anytime one of your heroes withdraws from battle, you can add a hero of matching brigade from your deck straight into battle. So it's like even more powerful than a hero that exchanges because you can just keep doing it. Not to mention the fact that she also says that your abilities that target opponent's hand are regardless of protect abilities. So, whether it's her ability to look at your opponent's hand or any other card that, targets your opponent's hand, doesn't have to worry about protect abilities. So it's just wildly strong, especially when she becomes yet another way to pull out some of the OP green heroes from the new set, like, Jeremiah and Amos, especially. The way that I built my Hannah Paragon deck is just to have, tons and tons and tons of ways to band to Amos, whether he's in your territory or your reserve or your deck or your discard pile. And you get that great cannot be interrupted battle win just by banding him into battle. Yeah, it's yeah, it's wild and crazy. And some of these Paragons are more basic. They're just a neat, simple, thematic introduction. People like Moses, for example. Moses, his ability is not wild and crazy. I think he's probably the most vanilla feeling of the commanders. I mean, wow, I just called them commanders. Of the Paragons, he's like the most vanilla of the Paragons. And I intentionally made some of them kind of simple and straightforward, for like a new player, for example. But some of these other ones, they completely change the way you build a deck and completely change, make strategies that would be completely impossible in regular Redemption. So it's very exciting.
So what's the best way to get started with Paragon? Maybe some of you are listening at home, staring at your redemption cards, and it's like, okay, how do I know what the deck building rules are? How do I know what the card rotation pool is? What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, well, the best way to get started is to go to landofredemption.com because that's where, all of the, various files you'll need are hosted. You have your rules, you have all of the Paragons that you can download and print or however you want to do that. And like the Lost Souls that you'll need, several articles that can give you advice or will give you some sample decks. But once you get those basic resources on Land of Redemption, what's super, super helpful is to use Tim's deck builder because it kind of enforces all of the Paragon rules for you and makes it so easy. When he added that feature to his deck builder, I was rejoicing because it made the process so much faster because you can pull up any of the Paragons that there are, which I believe there's 42 of them because there's one for every combination of Good Brigade and Evil Brigade that's in the format. And once you select it, not only can you look at a picture of it, but Tim's also coded it so that it gives you the quantities of all the different card types. And as you add cards into your deck, it'll keep a running total of like how many white cards you have, for example, or brown cards for Moses. And there's also a filter on the, in the legality filter, you can click Paragon. So it just only shows you the Paragon cards. So you can very simply just like, for example, look at all the legal Paragon cards that are brown and then you'll see. When you do that, you will find, like we were talking about earlier, some of the brigades definitely have a lot more options right now than the others. And that's another reason why I'm very much looking forward to the next set and Roots 2. I feel like it's going to put a lot of the brigades on a more level playing field. But don't take that to say that you'll feel limited. Like there are still plenty of options for everybody. And this deck building tool is super helpful. You can build a Paragon deck in minutes. And chances are you have a lot of the Paragon legal cards because it's, starter decks and Roots make up the backbone of it, really. So yeah.
Yeah, this isn't just a spot to plug my deck builder. It is something that generally is really helpful for building Paragon. Specifically, like in the deck builder itself, we have all the deck building rules, PDFs, and even Lost Souls that you can print out. Those are hosted on Land of Redemption 2 under the resources tab. You have to scroll all the way down to the bottom for that. But yeah, just going back to the Paragons, you have a great way to create Paragons. So to create a Paragon deck, go to the deck builder tab and select the Paragon format, and that'll put down the drop down of which Paragon you want to put to your deck. And once you click on that, a little info thing will pop-ups saying like, hey, you only have 4 out of 12 white cards. So yeah, maybe it is a little tedious to add the cards, but over time, You'll get a little bit more comfortable with that deck building process. And then once you built a deck, you can save it once you log in, and it'll show up here in your decks. And you can create the little folders. So you can have a folder for all your Paragon decks. And this even has a way to export it to Lackey. So if you want to play it on Lackey somehow, I don't know how you're going to do that. There's a way to do that. And the way to do that is you go to this export button. That's going to copy that to clipboard. You open up Lackey and you paste it in the Lackey. There's a button to do that. All right, so let's keep moving on. We got just a couple more questions. Maybe this is the last one. How can people give you feedback about Paragon? Maybe they have some good experiences. Maybe they want to encourage you. Maybe they're just like, oh, this Paragon is so OP. Why'd you make Benaniah so good?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Please send feedback. It's probably the best way to do that is through Discord. My username is Iracorn on Discord. And yeah, you can either, just if it's a more general question about it, you can send that in general chat, or of course you're always free to send me a direct message. That's totally good too. And please, if you have questions, if you have just simple comments or even major concerns, like I want to hear them. I want feedback. There's 42 Paragons, and there's no way that I as one person can make them balanced. And there's also no way that I as one person am going to come up with all of the, all the clever ideas for future ones. So if you have comments about specific Paragons, or even just about the format's rules in general, like seriously, please send those my way. And it's totally great if you have comments before you play, but your feedback is worth so much more after you try it out as well. A lot of the questions that I have gotten so far are from people who haven't tried it out yet. And I'd love to see how some of the ways that you find it interesting, or some of the decisions that you were more skeptical about, how those change after you have a couple of Paragon games under your belt. I'd love to hear that. So yeah.
I think what I'll try to do is I'll try to ask the Discord moderators, maybe we can create a new channel called Paragon, and then if people have questions or comments, that could be another way for people to solicit feedback there too. All right, Kurt, thanks for hopping on for me. We've had a blast talking about Paragon. Is there anything else you'd like to just say or share? It doesn't have to be about Paragon, but it can just be whatever. It's open mic time.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll just say that I really hope that you all can enjoy this format. It was a labor of love and love for the game of Redemption that's been such a big part of my life, and love for all of you players out there who I think deserve like a really fun casual multiplayer format that they can play and that they can share with new players and all of that. So yeah, I hope you enjoy, and if there are parts you don't enjoy, tell me. I want to hear that too. And other than that, just thank you to Tim for all that you've done for this format. I mean, especially for some of the feedback you've given me, and oh my goodness, the deck builder, which makes the deck building process so much smoother, so easy. It's been so wonderful. And thanks for having me on right now to answer some people's questions and just talk about it. It's been fun.
Great. Well, yeah, I'm definitely a big fan and supporter of this format. I can't wait to see more and more people try it out. And that's going to wrap up the interview. Hope you all had a good time. We'll see you in the next one. Redemption,